What's up, brother Bill? How are we doing today?
Well, how are you, Michael?
Let's see, that's your nickname. I'm doing great, man. How's were you at the office today?
I was at the office in Pennsylvania. Yep. I'm currently in my center, which is below my chiropractic office. So I just got done seeing chiropractic clients for the day. Yeah.
Well, so what's the name of your podcast you have? Something alignment?
Yeah. It's the Evolving Practice podcast. So it's
Hmm.
with Dr. Sean Carey and myself. Yeah. The Evolving
And
Practice.
what's is it? I mean, it's all. I'm assuming it's all blending kind of the chiropractic world and the spiritual world, or self improvement.
Yeah. It's a blend of both. So, the focus is on healing and beyond just general healing, it's directed at people who work in the healing profession because there's the care that, as individuals who work with people, there's a lot we can do to better ourselves to handle serving people. And then also it's for people who are seeking healing. So we've built it with those two audiences in mind, and a lot of my clients actually have been listening to it over time. And when I say my clients, my chiropractic clients and then also the healing clients, because it does bridge some of the gaps of the different areas that I practice, but it also helps them understand that there's more to each one of those avenues that I practice.
Yeah, it's just not the thing, right? It always goes deeper than the thing. That's
Yeah.
why. Yeah, but ultimately, like, what is it, right? If you're looking at chiropractic, if you're looking at a spiritual path, it's ultimately alignment, right? Healing through
Yep.
aligning. Right. So yes, we have our
You know,
spines. We have the middle pillar on the spiritual path.
100%. I have a close friend who his name's Justin Shank. He has a podcast called Growth Now Movement, and he's like a professional podcaster. He does live events. He does professional podcasting. He teaches people how to do it. He has different companies in that world, and I've known him for years, and he looks at me and he's done work in both areas with me, and he's like, Bill, the word that just always comes up is alignment. It's like this spiritual and physical alignment of an individual, and I think that's what the bigger draw that brought me to both worlds. I didn't necessarily know it when I first started seeking, if you will, but it comes together so well.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's the thing of alignment is so you can heal yourself, right? Putting the body back together so energy can flow properly, putting sort of our psyche and the aspects of our us back together so energy can flow properly and we can heal and be whole again.
Yeah, and do you know what's funny about that conversation is people actually do understand that. Like I've spoken to many different groups, whether it's all ages, all different conditions. But if you explain on a very simple level to people that a person heals from the self, like all healing is self healing, they can acknowledge that. No one's going to deny the fact that, like, if you have a cut on your hand and you let it go, there's an intelligence that's going to handle that situation. You could put a band-aid on it, Neosporin, whatever it may be. It's going to maybe assist the process in keeping it clean, but it's not what does the healing, because if there's no life in that individual, nothing's going to happen. So people are like, yeah, that does make sense. So it's like you break a bone, they reset it, they leave it alone. What does the healing, right? And then when we as energetic healing practitioners, it's not like we're adding to anything, we're just serving as a reminder. And so much of healing, when you're talking about the nervous system or from an energetic perspective, I feel like the word that keeps coming up for me is this awareness, where if you can't feel physically, you aren't aware necessarily of what is happening or not. So I
That's a funny
love
thing
making, yeah, I
because
love making things simple for people.
yeah, right. It's like the thing I do for guys when I'm talking about business. I try to relate everything to like the gym and business, and it's the same thing
Yeah.
for you with chiropractic stuff because it is very. I mean, to us now it is very simple and practical and just kind of part of life. But when you're learning something that you don't have an original awareness of, it's something new until you actually go through the process and integrate it. But what you said I really like is the feeling part, and it's the same thing. If you can't feel it, you can't heal it,
Yeah.
and there's been a lot of discussions with these podcasts. It's primarily men and entrepreneurs and fathers.
Mm.
And there's that confusion of like, oh, well, men need to be more in tune with their emotions, the feminine side and stuff like that. I'm like, no, that's kind of confusing guys even more, right? Because then you'll paralyze
Mm.
guys. But what guys need, or just people in general, they need to be able to feel to be able
Mm.
to tune into those things and be able to actually work with it, right? It's the subtle energy. It's the quieting of the mind. It's in the chiropractic stuff, it's like the relaxation, the nervous system, right? It's
Mm.
getting that so you can be more in tune and reconnect with yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and most people don't create enough contrast to actually experience the change. It's like overtraining in your sensory information, right? Like if you worked out 4 times in a day every day, you would never create enough space to actually gain results or have awareness of if you're doing too much or too little, right? It would just start to blend together. And the
Well,
same
until
thing
you
like
just cripple yourself.
yeah, well, exactly. So people don't even realize I do like using fitness. I was a competitive cross country track distance runner, a marathon runner post collegiately. And there's a lot of principles in athletics that are just so foundational to understand healing and progression and repair. And you actually get, you really get stronger by the rest more than just the breakdown. You need the rest in the repair and the recovery, or it leads to like burnout. And that affects everything, right? Like if you're burned out, you can't think straight, you can't observe yourself well, you make up all these stories and you just kind of derailed. And a lot of people run around in that state, right? Like that state of overdrive constantly. And then they never have an opportunity to look at like what could be the deeper underlying things. And listen, I'm a productive person too, so I don't love sitting, meditating, and being quiet, but I understand the value in my life now to make sure it's a more of a priority along the
Yeah,
way.
it's a wrestling healing. I remember it was maybe like a year and a half, 2 years ago. I was talking to Sovereign, and he was saying, he was kind of like, "Hey, dummy." He was like, he was using the thing of like, if somebody's working out too much and too extreme, that strong person eventually, it's like polarity, right? Eventually, that strong person becomes weak because they're injured,
Yeah.
right? Or
Yep.
somebody, think about money, right? If you spend all your money, if you're rich, you spend all your money, now you're broke, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
swings back to that other side. So if you are pushing extreme, extreme, extreme all the time, you have a way higher chance to damage yourself because you're not giving yourself that space to receive and recover and receive the healing to become
Yep.
stronger, right? It's not about those extremes all the time. Yeah, that was, maybe my biggest lesson on the spiritual path.
Yeah. I mean, I've had that where I've kind of I've definitely blown up along that because I've done too much, too fast, too soon, and you don't know what that's all about until you do it either. So there's like, also I try to not steer people. It's like saying, okay, you could overtrain if you work out. You could, but the likelihood of doing so is most people won't. So it shouldn't be like the thing that keeps you from actually working out. Well, I'm just scared because I do too much of everything, so I'm just going to burn out here too. It's like, well, no, if you start running, then you start to understand like how that's going to affect you. So I think it's healthy to like blow up sometimes, right?
Yeah,
Not
you
like
need to know
force.
your. Well, are you saying as like knowing your limits so you can push a little bit past that so you can grow?
Yeah, and so you can
Right.
do it in a more sustainable manner going forward, right? It's like when you just do too much too soon, like an adrenaline junkie, sometimes you're like, oh, but then it allows you to recalibrate for the long haul. Um, I've done that a lot with some of with the path of progression. I've had a lot of opportunity to hang out with Ipsissimus Sandra, who's, I think 82 years old now. She's been, part of spiritual path for like 25 years and beyond. And when you look at your life like through this longer period of time, it allows you to make some steadier decisions. And maybe it's the reflection point of where I am in my life and having a daughter and all that. But I want to do things that are sustainable for myself in an efficient way because I do like to progress as well. But people just, it's good to blow up, not avoid the blow up.
Not avoid it. Well, I mean, that's why we have within safe means, right? Because that's where a coach or guide, somebody can come in and safely push your limits for you, right? When we do it by ourselves and we just get, if we're rushing it or if we're doing it with sort of a lack of maturity there in some ways, then yeah, it's much easier to get hurt, right? So I always say it's
Mm,
good to have a guide because the guide can safely push you without you really getting hurt, right? You might fall down, you
totally.
might stumble, you might have issues, but it's within kind of safe boundaries, so you don't completely just go
It's
overboard.
Yeah, it's a humbling thing, but it's really helpful as well. I mean, it sounds like we both have this like fitness background, but I always hired a coach that was outside of myself when I was competing because you'll just, if you run your life off of feelings or what you want to do that day, you really won't make the progress that you're looking for. And I always found that to be true. Whenever I trained myself, there were times on marathon training where I was like, you know what, I'm going to write my own plan. And I'd take an old plan and I'd rework that plan and I'd find myself going into like a Tuesday workout and be like, well, no, I'll do this one on Thursday, and I'll flip flop the Saturday with the Sunday, and then and that maybe works kind of for a week, and then you're a little bit off, and then the next week you're like, well, because I did that, I'll do, and you start like just
Negotiating with
compromising,
yourself.
negotiating
Yeah.
constantly. And I don't think we make the best progress in life when we're completely self-directed without the work of another to help us look and also
Beyond that.
see how great we can be, right? Because they'll see ways to push us that we would never see it in ourselves.
I say we could probably do about just by ourselves. We can probably do 80% of it, right? But that 20%
Okay.
is a massive missing piece. And I think I've talked about it
Yeah.
before. I have, we're saying about fitness. I had my bodybuilding coach. We've known each other for now 10 years, and he was taking me, like, I was competing and stuff. He taught me a lot of stuff. He was always pushing me, and we have a really good relationship, a really good flow of working out. But it's cool because now we still work out every once in a while, and every single time, he still has coaches and he's still coaching me, and we're bouncing things back. Like, there's never been a point in our 10 years of knowing each other and working out together that we've ever been like, oh, okay, we're not going to try anything else. We're not going to grow, progress. So
Yeah.
we've consistently grown and progressed over those 10 years together. And yeah, it doesn't matter. Like you said, it just doesn't matter how good you are. There's always a next step or somebody else that can refine a little piece to take you even further.
Yeah. And I think there's cycles of growth that, what I found okay, so my daughter's 5. Your daughter's around the same age, right? Is that
Yeah, she's 6. She'll be 7 soonish.
okay?
4 months or so.
So like the first year she went to school, the first 8 years, I think in practice, like I've been a chiropractor for 13 years. And I think the first like 8 or 9, I don't know if I missed a day for like illness. I don't know if that was like, even I didn't miss a day. I wouldn't get sick. And then it's like she goes to school like a year ago. And it was like I was in constant fight of like, don't get sick all winter. And that screws up your working out, that screws up your sleep, that screws up your schedule, everything. So I've realized over the last couple of years, because of this experience, like I have to do things a little bit different to prepare and take care of myself with supplementation and sleep and activity and everything to kind of handle what that new situation is. So there's times even now in a year where I know I can push physically a little bit more than other ones. So, I enjoy the long haul. Like you said, I'm sure in 10 years with your coach, you've had times where everything's working and clicking, and you have times where the completely opposite has been true, and you notice little things over the years that help us get better. And
The only
that's
time
kind of
that
what I
wasn't there was one season where I was just overloaded. My body was too stressed out. Back to the whole point, and
yeah.
I went to nationals, and I get off stage, and he goes, "Yeah, your body's worn out." Which, like, that's that goes. I was winning shows before that, and then it gets to kind of the end, the big show, and I just pushed my body way too far for too long, and it just didn't perform like it should have been. Right, so it's like, yeah, I should have. The smarter thing would have been for me just to rest, take more of a break,
Yeah.
and then go back
Yeah.
at it when So and it showed, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But like you said
Well,
about, like, what's up?
no, and I was going to say that's actually, I think, the one of the more important parts of healing that as Westerners don't want to do is like the do nothing. Like, you've done too much, do nothing. I had a client this morning, and it's like, I just want her. She's a chiropractic client. I've introduced a lot of the energy stuff to her, and she's always trying to do to fix instead of just like not
Speed.
do more. Yeah, and just be. And really, it's because she's just always in this state of like overdrive to fix everything. That I can see it, right? Because I've been that way too, and worked with many people. But all healing is self healing, and people have to recognize that before they're going to actually make the change too. You know?
Yeah, I know a lot of people, especially with healing too, that can get sort of overdone too. You don't have to do a billion healings at once and constantly be in a state of putting pieces back together, right? Because you can overdo that just as well. And
Mm-hmm.
sort of the people who are always in a state of doing, doing, doing. It's like, what are you trying? The difference between doing and being. It's like, what are you really trying to heal? Maybe you're just creating more problems by doing it too
Yeah.
much. So I think the best person, the best healer, the best guide is able to give you just enough, like right when you need it, right at that specific
Yeah.
moment, and you're able to take that and really run with it. Because yeah,
Mm.
what's the second Greek axiom? There's no thyself, and there's nothing in excess, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
anything good, even if we eat too much healthy food and we have too many calories, I can still be
Yeah.
bad. So yeah, it's like maybe this podcast can be called balance and alignment.
I mean, I think so. They're so important, and you don't really understand them. I think part of this conversation, what we developed earlier, is even from this running and walking and too much and too little, is like that's how you understand the middle pillar, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's how you understand the balance and when you're not on it. And you do have to venture a little bit to understand the limits and where and how to come back to. And um, a lot of people don't know where that is for themselves. And in all aspects of their life, they don't know where the balance point is. And the point isn't, I like this, the point isn't to remain on it at all times. That's not the point. But the point is to, recalibrate or recharge back to that center point so you can have greater perspective and awareness. And I think that's like really one of the keys to people taking control of their health, their healing, their mind. It's just so important.
Right. So yeah, back to alignment. That's why I like principles, right? Hermetics, it's all about governing principles, right? So the governing principles say, hey, you can go to these kind of different poles and you can have this experience, and you through your own discernment, you have to figure out kind of where that individual balance is and what works for you for your situation. And that's why I
Yeah.
always, since I read the Kabbalion the first time, really like tuned into these principles. Then you can see it. And what you said this
Yeah.
maybe like you said this maybe like 10 minutes ago is you can see where this stuff is connected with your fitness, chiropractic, spiritual path.
Yeah.
Principles are they're underlying, right? So you can take
Yeah.
core principles and apply them to every single part of life, and the same thing will still be true.
Yeah. And I love that teaching kind of like the way you do it. I
One
heard
thing
this
is how
like
you do everything.
years. Yeah, and we worked with a coach when I was practicing in Georgia, the office I worked in. We worked with a coach, and that was like his motto for everything. The way you do anything is the way you do everything. And he would say he was like a hired, consultant for different chiropractic offices. And he was crazy. But I really liked him because he was super intense, very driven, and he knew what he knew really well. And the one thing he would always march around and say is like, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And I remember my wife kind of fighting that idea because now she totally is behind that idea. Because when we compartmentalize it, sometimes we can't really see the way it's affecting. But the one example he always gave was when people were being interviewed for like an associate doctor position, the staff would go out and like look through their car window and see if their car was organized.
Oh, I love that one because I'm such a neat freak.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it would look to see like how do they take care of their car? Like how do they take care of the inside of their car? Not like open it up and move through, but just like take a look at it because the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And
I
I resonated with that. I was like, that makes sense to me. I get that.
I tell guys that all the time with like with dating. I tell people that ask me relationship questions. I'm like, well, look at their car, look at their home, see how that is, because that
Yeah.
also says the external is a reflection of the internal, right? So if I see somebody's space or property is like messy, then I'm like, there's
Hmm.
something going on internally that they haven't organized or sorted out or healed.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's a big
Uh-huh.
one.
It's a big deal. And like that's I do live my like when I heard that and could quantify it, it's also like a very hopeful principle because it actually means when you start working in one area of your life, it's going to affect other areas. So I think it can sound initially like super overwhelming to be like, oh, the way you do, and you're like, oh well, I'm not happy over here and I'm not happy in this part of my life. And but it's like you can take hold in this one aspect and then it starts to emulate out. And
Well,
I think that's why
you can
go
do the
ahead.
one thing. What I tell people when they're stuck, I'm like, well, go clean your place or go to the gym. They're like, why are you telling me to like,
Yeah.
somebody texted me maybe a week ago, and they're like, hey, everything's falling apart, whatever. And I was like, go to the gym, call me in 2 hours. And what happened?
Do
They
I
went to
know?
the
Do I know this
yeah,
person?
yeah. They went to the gym. They called me in 2 hours. They're like, oh, things are getting better. I'm like, yeah, okay, go take
Yeah,
care of yourself, go clean, whatever. And that, I live by the
all
same
the time.
things I preach. And if I'm a little bit off, the first step is just get moving, just do something, right?
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
don't need to
Yeah,
like maybe that first step isn't sitting down and meditating. Maybe it's not doing
yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah,
Maybe it's just like go clean some dishes, go fold some laundry, go take a walk, go whatever, right? Because once you get moving, you're moving out of suffering or out of that, like you're physically doing it and you're energetically doing it as well. And then when
yeah,
we move, it opens up a greater potential little by little, right? So it's
yeah.
like there's another guy made him go. It's funny, like these little things, and it's always the energy behind it though. By like made a guy go buy a bunch of plants. Yeah, he was like, "Oh, my energy is this." I'm like, "Go to Home Depot and spend like $200 on plants, and then call me back." And he's like,
It's
"Oh, I feel better," right?
I was
'Cause it's always the energy
yeah,
behind the thing. It's never the thing; it's the energy behind the thing.
yeah. Yeah, and like that energy of making things better is like very rewarding. And I love making my bed and putting my house in order and doing like I actually really enjoy those things. And I feel like that's a theme coming up now, like the idea of like cleanliness is next to godliness. Like that is true. And I taught an Empower Yourself recently, and right after one of the initiates, she's like, I haven't cleaned my garage forever. And I just had to clean up my garage right afterwards. She's like, I just had to like take care of everything and throw this away and donate this and that. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, you start to clean up your energetic world, it's going to show up in different ways in your physical world. And she's like, oh, that would actually really make sense. And I think that's why people do often, well, our society doesn't necessarily look to the energy first, right? Like we're talking about energy now. But that's the power of like energetic shift is like you actually will go do something different, and then if you have the awareness with maybe working with a guide or somebody, you can oftentimes see how it's clearing up in other ways throughout your life. And this is what really happened to me like with life activation is I just started to feel more present in all the things I was doing. Before I was just kind of running around like quickly to in every direction, and I was productive, but this made me like focus, and I was like, this is amazing. I can be
Well,
focused and
it reconnects you, it plugs you back in, right? So
hmm
it's activating those energies. And I understand it's like people say all the time, they're like, I have no idea what you do. And I'm like, well,
yeah,
because it's backwards of what we are kind of, what we're kind of taught in society, because everybody looks at the effect first and not the cause. The cause is the energy. And everybody
yeah,
can, when we take people through these practical examples and say, okay, well, you need energy to like get out of bed and go to the gym, right? You need energy to work, you need energy to whatever, right? So like
yeah,
energy is the cause, and the effect is, okay, I get healthy, I productive, I'm whatever it is. I'm
mm,
like, oh, okay,
hmm
cool, right? But yeah,
yeah,
the healing is a way to reconnect yourself and give you the energy. Like you were
hmm
saying, your student, she once she got initiated, it's like, when you put the key in the ignition, right? And it's like it gets
yeah,
things going. And she's like, oh, now the things I kind of felt stuck and stagnant. Now I'm going to actually initiate that and take care of that stuff. Take care of
yeah,
the cleaning, or maybe the project, or maybe the family stuff or relationship, whatever it
yeah.
is, right?
It's like the standard gets up. She was like, I'm living to this standard. Like this is my standard. Like what the heck? And then it's like she up leveled and was like, I don't want to live in this space. I want to make this better and make this over here. And I
So
mean, I think that happens for
yeah, and she refines everything. Initiation's one of the hardest. It's one of those things you just don't know until you know, right? It's like,
That's exactly right.
there's life initiations and there's spiritual initiations. I kind of separate the two for
Yeah.
examples, but there's life initiations are like certain phases in life, maybe having a kid, marriage, those are life initiations. Spiritual initiations are very similar, but they can be done as soon as the person's ready for them. And it's like being reborn on a new, almost new reality, right? So, if you look at society and they're all, just say they're at level one, when you get initiated, you get brought up to that second level. That second level, when you're doing things differently, you're refining what, you're refining level one. You master level one because you're looking at it and say, okay, how can I make this better? How can I make that better? When you're in those lower levels, you can't really, there's not enough light or clarity to actually see what needs done. That's why we have to go up to the next level, and then we can look down like, oh, okay, that was much easier. I can fix this, do that, boom, and then it's just,
Yeah.
this is when people talking about quantum leaps and miracles. That's what it is.
Well, and I feel like the way I love trying to come up with ways to help people understand the logistics of this, right? Like the understanding of you're getting initiated. What the heck does that mean to you? But and I've noticed this in the difference of working with people who've done initiation and people who haven't. And when people do initiation, they start to look at, you could call it, let's say use a singular object. Let's like a triangle, right? You look at a triangle and you're like, it's a triangle. It has three sides, it has corners, it has angles. But an initiated person is like, okay, and there's some deeper meaning to that. And then they start to know that there's a deeper meaning to it. Then they start to actually look into it, and then they start to figure it out. And that's where like initiation takes this superficial picture and it starts to allow people to see the depth of it. And not in this like highly OCD kind of way, but in this way of like, there's more meaning to the work that I do. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a teacher. I go to work. I work with kids. And then it's like, I'm an initiate. I work with young individuals who I can see how my influence of creating a learning space for them to develop and grow so they can be their best selves. So that's a very different way of looking at your life and what you do. And with initiation, people start to look at the depth of what they're doing and what's in front of them. That naturally starts to occur. And when it does that, you can start to see how superficial people view their current life.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did a podcast 3 days ago. This lady Misha, she's she's over in the UK, and she's very in tune with all this stuff. But she was talking about, her first connection to the spiritual stuff was through sacred geometry, right? Symbolism. And then when she started diving into this stuff, she goes, "Oh, this is all right in front of my face, right?" Like you said, it's like, is a triangle a triangle, or is like, what are the deeper aspects of that? And the whole podcast is really good. I'm probably I'll post it. No, it's already posted actually. And start posting clips about it. But it's really, really cool because we talk about just the mundane and kind of the things that come off as just face value, but then it's like going deeper and connecting it back to the energy. It's like connecting to the energy and connecting to the essence of it. And one of the funny parts of that episode, we're talking about rituals and connecting to those energies. And she's like, it sounds silly, but like I have dirt from my old garden sitting in my drawer, and I connect to that because it tunes me into that energy of joy, peace, whatever. So it's like, it's when we can engage more and go deeper with certain things, we get more out of it, and it gives us more of that essence, the thing we want. Then we see it in our day-to-day life.
Yeah. And then it allows us to do more with that life. That's the whole idea is, and it can be hard sometimes because when you do see more, sometimes people are like really attacked. Like, I don't want to put that down. I don't want to put down the drugs. I don't want to put down this because what would I show up in this world? What would I look like if I didn't have this crutch or that one? And that's where I see my initiate struggle the most, is when it's like the fight to put down the thing that you now really know is holding you back. Now you really know it. It's not like, that might be creating some difficulty or challenges in my life that I don't want. And then it's like, no. Here's the mirror. It really is that thing. And you're like, well, but I don't, what if I'm not and then it's that like stall.
Well, it's the same thing you're saying about one of your initiatives. When you go up to a higher level and you can see kind of the contrast between where you are now and where you were. Somebody in the school was saying this a few years ago, but it's like, it's a greater fall. So when you tap back into those, it's like the higher you go, the higher you can fall. So when you're up on those higher levels and you're progressing, and say that vice or low energy or stress or anger, whatever it is down here, when you're like, let me just jump off and go and play with that, it's going to be a harder fall, and you'll feel it more. And then the good part of that is you're like, no, I just don't want this anymore. So now it's like, you can actually feel it, and you're not just, when you're down in that sort of fuzzy, chaotic, confused state, you're like, well, I'm used to eating this bad food. I'm used to drinking. I'm used to this. And you're kind of like, okay, I know there's pros and cons, but it kind of just, you're comfortable with it at some level, right? When you say, hey, I want to grow up and I want to progress, then it's a bigger fall, and you're like, no, this is definitely not for me anymore.
That's a good point. Yeah, I like that analogy. I can see that pretty well, and that's what does happen.
Jumping.
Well, it also probably on the other side has the potential to further the distance away, so therefore it isn't as big of a deal, right? So like in the other ones, like if you're not going to go, it's like, well, I can't even remember that thing, Like that's when people find out. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I don't drink. I think I've been sober 6.5, almost 7 years, and whenever people like if you don't drink, especially when you first stop drinking, right? People are always like, oh, you don't drink, you must have had a problem or something, right? And then I always learned, I was like, how do I even talk about this? I'm like, I just choose to be sober. And sometimes like people want to know, but when I communicate this work, I was like, all of a sudden one day I was just like, that's not part of my life anymore. It just went away. It just like disappeared in the distance. I just kind of slowly moved away from it. And that's what my experience was with drinking alcohol. There was a time when I was young, I would consider myself a problem, but everyone has a problem at 22 when they're not limiting what they do, right?
Well,
but when you get old,
Well, the
You
opposite
know?
side of it, like what I was playing, like jumping off a cliff, it's like once you feel better, it's a difference between knowing and feeling. Like knowing, like, hey, I see that person over there, he's doing better, but you don't have that yourself yet. You haven't integrated that
Yeah.
piece, that aspect, that energy. But once you feel it, and then you're like, oh, but I know what it felt like to get hammered 5 years ago and
Yeah.
be hungover for 3 days and just feel like complete crap. Now that I feel
Yeah.
better, I do better. Most people can't argue that. I'm like, well, how is your life? Talking about energy, making this logical. How is your
Mm.
life when you feel crappy, when you're angry? They're like, oh, life sucks. Now, what are your actions? Shitty. They dip into their vices way easier. When you feel better, you're more clear, you have better ideas, you're more helpful to people, you have better relationships, you have better everything. And it all comes back to the feeling, right?
Mm.
So it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, ultimately, that's a big key of the spiritual path is like it gives you the feeling, and then you actually know, then you actually do, and then you actually like
Yeah.
are the thing, and there's no kind of trying to trick or because that's like where vices are. You're trying to hijack the experience because you don't think
Yeah.
you can achieve the thing. So once you achieve the thing, you're like, oh, I don't need that anymore. That's just
Yeah.
I don't need alcohol to be social. I don't need alcohol in relationships or joy. I am that thing now.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they don't actually hijack your true awareness and your true feelings about something, right? Like, so then you feel and express more genuinely because a lot of the devices just kind of keep us away from that. And we do try to tend to be, I think this is what when people train or they use their body in a physical way, like you really start to understand what truly being uncomfortable is. Do you know what I mean? Like when you put
Yeah.
yourself through some very challenging physical tests, like you really know what uncomfortability is because you pushed a couple levels past what you once thought was uncomfortable. And then you learn about the smaller things and how you actually feel about them, right?
Like what smaller things? It's like
Well, I mean, think about this. Like whenever somebody does something like very physically challenging and they put their body through a ton of pain and they have an accomplishment. Let's just use a marathon. That's the level of like discomfort you experience in a little bit of working out isn't that much to be like, well, working out's hard. I don't like doing it for 15 minutes every day. Well, you're like, it's not as big of a deal when you've put yourself through like a hellish trek or whatever that may be. So your perspective changes and you're like, I can handle this. I can handle it consistently over time. And that's what different, aspects of just growth occur when people do that. And then it recalibrates
yeah,
what
like what
you,
hard actually is.
yeah. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like you're like, oh man, that workout was hellish today, and I almost threw up. Right, you did throw up, and then it left you sore for multiple days, and then you're like, well, I can handle what's up next. It's
But
not
did
going to
you
be so
die?
bad. Yeah, did you die?
If you
Exactly.
didn't, yeah, the only thing that's going to stop your progression is death. So if you didn't die, you're still good. You're going to get stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, even like this in spiritual growth, people like really fear, I don't think consciously fear what they could be or fear the self to some degree. But there is, I remember early on this path, everything I did, I get this like feeling in my gut and this nervousness and this like really like, I don't know why I don't want to do this, but I feel this. And now I've come to know it's like part of you that wants to keep you small and just keeps dying, right? It just keeps like, it's gonna change. And that's why getting to initiation is really hard. Is like people have this experience in the body that's like, potentially uncomfortable. I don't know if I want that. And yet it's also that very same part of them that's going to go away that was limiting their potential anyway.
I think it's fear of self. I mean, that's what it was for me. But I think it's
Yeah.
true. I think it's fear of self and fear of your potential because at a deeper level, your potential and you look at it as like, holy
Yeah.
shit, it's this big thing. So like, I don't know
Yeah.
if I'm ready for that. And that's kind of a thing, struggling to get to initiation. You have to to obtain that high power potential that you can have, you have to take responsibility. People who
Yeah.
are having sort of internal turmoil and don't want to step up to the next stage in life is they're scared of their own potential and the
Mm.
responsibility that they need to take to obtain that thing. Now, once you obtain it,
Mm.
it's the best thing you can possibly do. It's amazing. There's so
Hmm.
much joy and life becomes just amazing. That's why I'm like, come on, just
Yeah.
do it. Right. I wish, but we can't,
Yeah.
kind of that we can't just they have to have faith and trust. There's a lot of aspects they have to have, and
Hmm.
a guide is opening the door. A guide can't we can't push people through the door. We just say, hey, this is
No.
when you're ready, this is here. and
Yeah.
ultimately comes to their personal empowerment and their decision.
Yeah. And it is a lot like watching your daughter do something that you're like, just, just don't do that. You don't need to have that experience. But they kind of need to have that experience before they don't want to do that experience. You know what I mean? It's like you might know it's right and good at all times, and yet it's still, they're going to have to figure it out at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's why it's like, but you have that container to have your kids safely learn, right? It's like
Right.
there's kind of helicopter parents where they
Oh,
paralyze their kids because they're like, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that, and the kid's like, well, then I can't do anything.
yeah.
So then they're still going to do something, and then that might be where they kind of act out and rebel because they're like, hey, I know I can't
Yeah.
do anything, but I have to do something. So
Yeah.
this is the thing, right? So
Yeah.
the parenting can be looked at the same way as a guide is giving somebody a safe container to have the direct experience to learn to kind of brush up against, each pole
Yeah.
and then kind of find where they are and where their power is and who they are, who they're supposed to be, right? Because we don't, people, I had somebody message me on, Instagram and say, hey, can you do a reading for me? And I'm like, yeah, I can, after the life activation is like the codon reading and stuff that gives, but we don't give anybody, I don't tell anybody what their future is, right?
Yeah.
Because it's impossible for me to know. They have to write that themselves. That's their agreement, their commitments that they already made.
Yeah. Well, and people, I love talking because that's a very, like, spiritually, in many ways, I don't think people have an awareness that they actually aren't self-leading. And what I mean by that is we want people, I'm not saying I do or you do, but a lot of times people want another person to just tell them what they need to do, right? Like, just tell me what to do. But that doesn't, it actually isn't the most helpful thing. And then when you're talking about, like, the guidance of what people are doing is like giving readings and breaking that, like, breaks people's contracts. And whenever somebody starts to, like, unsolicitedly, like, give you information about your life, like, that doesn't just feel right. Because, and I believe it's because, at the end of the day, we are meant to learn these lessons for ourselves, and your lessons are different than mine, and mine are different than another's. And that just always felt so invasive, that idea of, like, the guru concept. And sometimes people think as spiritual guides we are, quote, gurus, but the truth is it's more about, like, what do you want to do about it? What are you going to do about it? What's
Yeah,
true?
spiritual guide. I mean, the psychics and all that. That's extremely disempowering to say, hey, you have to keep coming back to
Totally.
me to know the correct
Yeah.
answer, right? And that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's why I like being a guide because we don't give them, hey, I mean, there is some like, hey, recommendations,
Yeah.
but
Totally.
it's not dogmatic. Say, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. There's not, it's giving
Yeah.
them tools. It's giving them, like, if you want somebody to be an athlete, you can't, or like we're talking about running and stuff, you can't run the run for them, right? But you can give
No.
them recommendations on supplements and training and like principles, and
Yeah.
you can give them help, but at the end of the day,
Hmm.
they're still running their own race. They're still fighting their own fight,
Yeah.
right? We just give them as many tools and potential and tools of empowerment as we possibly can. They
Yeah.
have to kind of wield those swords, and they have to be in the driver's seat. And what other comparison
Yeah.
can I make?
Yeah. No, but you can also maybe, I never thought about it this way, but, like, a coach can also predict to some degree, like, the potential, right? It'd be like, well, you have a lot of potential, and you
You kind
you
of
have to
weigh your
recognize
odds.
that. Yeah, yeah. In some ways, it's like, well, for me, on this path, I got to know myself, and by knowing myself, and I'm still doing that. I put down X, Y, and Z. I picked up this and that. I moved more in this direction and less in that direction. I stepped forward in this way. I got part of my power back, and maybe that's going to be true for you to some
Yeah.
degree. And
And
I've seen that experience. Yeah,
you had zero resistance doing it too, right? Because
yeah,
you're looking for a straightforward answer, and all your guides and teachers and mentors said, "Oh yeah, let me give you the answer that you're expecting because you want it just to be easy and you want to get over." That's another problem too. Is
yeah,
people are looking for the answer that justifies their current state. They want the thing that they expect. They want you just to reconfirm to say, okay, the stuff I'm doing that's creating the life I have. I don't want you to challenge. That turns a lot of people away
yeah,
because the thing that's actually going to help you is going to challenge your current situation, your current beliefs, your current
Hmm.
opinions, whatever it is.
Yep.
And it's like tough love, right? It's like the thing is same thing with your parents, right? Is they're not there to give you, they're not there to just coddle you and say, oh, okay, it's going to be all right here. Like, keep doing that same bad thing, keep hurting yourself, right? It's like, no, they're going to challenge you and give you like tough love because that's the thing that's going to help you
Hmm.
advance and progress, right? So I know a lot of
Hmm.
people, if they come to a spiritual path, they don't hear immediately what they want to hear. Like, oh, well, it's not for me, right? Because it just doesn't justify where they're.
Yeah. And it humbles you if you're not humbled. And that's tough. It
Yeah,
humbles. The people I've seen who are like skipping steps in their expression, like, well, I'm only doing this so I can go to this. And it's like, I've seen that cut people out like really quickly. If you can't just like humble yourself of where you are and what you don't know about your current situation in the future, it can really, it almost always backfires. In every class I
yeah.
teach, the person that's just like trying to go to the next level before they've even gotten past the next level, I'm always approaching that with a little bit of like, just,
Those are I talk about it all the time because like I lived it, I did it. The two things,
you
right?
did.
Like when I was advanced, yeah, well, because it's cool to get like, I'll kind of go back. So it's like the doing the things you don't want to do. When I was progressing the spiritual path, we have the healer path, and we have the RM path. Obviously, for a man, like they're going to be more drawn to the RM path, but like we were saying, balance, alignment, having that recovery, right?
Yeah.
That just that wasn't normal to me at my current state, right? So
Hmm.
I favored one of the extremes, and I kept pushing myself, pushing myself, pushing myself. Then
Yeah.
I got humbled and said, "Oh, wait, maybe this thing I've had resistance to. Maybe I got to go check out that because, you know,
Yeah.
pushing myself to these extremes just seems like something's off, keeps breaking me down." And the
Hmm.
growth then came from doing that thing I didn't want to do and
Oh, yeah.
humbled me, but it brought in that piece of healing. And then I had both sides, and I'm like, oh, there's no clarity in the extreme, right? Even
Hmm.
if you're extreme on the other way, and you're like, I just want to do healing, I don't want to build myself and strengthen myself, I just want to be a healer. It's like, okay, well, what's going to happen when something comes and just wipes you out because you're not strong
Hmm.
enough to, that's why
Yeah.
I like the pathway of those two things. And yeah, definitely. Like when you're saying that, I'm like, I can speak to that because I experienced that. So I was like, I know
Oh, I
exactly what
wanted
that
nothing
is.
to do. I wanted nothing to do with Healers Academy and doing life activations. I was like, I'm a professional. I'm not going to do like I want more light, so I want the initiation. I really like how light works in my life, so I want more of it. But I don't think I want to serve people. I'm a professional, blah blah blah. And I mean, it was just so natural for me to do that. Like I just opened my mouth that I could do it, and then people wanted to do it, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm doing this. But like, I think even when I teach, I let people know, I'm like, I think you probably look at me now and you're like, of course he wanted to do all this. Of course he wanted to be a spiritual guide. Of course he wanted to do a healing work. I didn't want to do any of that. I was like, can't there be a better way to like help people be connected? And I have not found a better way at all. And this one just keeps getting better for the fruits that I see that it unlocks for other people.
But why did you? I mean, I know how you got introduced to the path, but why did you
Yeah.
start? Why did you start seeking something? Where were you at when you originally
Oh
started?
man. Yeah. So when I got life activated, it was in 2016. I was at a chiropractic conference in
Before that, before
uh
that,
co-
before that.
before. Oh, like how did I get into healing work or just
No,
work?
like what? I mean, I think even though you said, oh, I don't want to be a healer, I don't want to be a guide, all these things,
Ah,
there's still a deeper aspect of like, yeah, I mean, if you asked me 4 or 5 years ago, I would say, oh, I don't want to be a guide. But if you asked me, but my overall mission since I remember 5 years old was like, I just want to help people live a good life. I want to figure that
yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Right.
So great. So I definitely wanted people to bring out the best in themselves. And I wanted to focus that on the individual. So I was a special education teacher before I went to chiropractic school. So,
Also a
you
musician
know,
and a bunch of other things people wouldn't expect, right?
yeah, I'm very eclectic. I use this as individualization, right? Like I drive an F-250. I go camping. I'm a healer. I play bass guitar. I played in bands. I've gone to lots of concerts. I was not semi professional, but I was like on the cusp of Olympic trial and distance running back in the day. I almost went to school for graphic design and videography. I had a lot of interest. I was all over the place. So, but in
So
those,
when you're walking through Pennsylvania, don't judge the guy with a sweater vest on. He might be might be cooler than you
exactly,
think.
man. You have
Yeah.
no idea. And I love that because like that is individualization. Like it doesn't all fit together, but it's like what I like and what I do. I kind of live in the country and I have 2 dogs and like it just doesn't always. And then when people find out I'm a spiritual teacher and they're like, it messes with their mind for a second. But I guess you
Sorry.
could say is I looked at people and I was like, how do we get the most out of each and every one? I want to get the most out of myself and I want to help others get the most out of themselves. And I went into special education. My dad was involved in special education administration and I liked aspects of that. And what I found out to be true is I didn't want to work with a subject. I didn't want to work with an area of interest. I wanted to work with individuals. So that led me into that form of education, which is very individualized. I worked in a high school emotional support and behavioral support classroom for 3 years. And I personally had a transformative experience with chiropractic that led me to go to chiropractic school. So in the midst of my student teaching, I had debilitating panic attacks and anxiety that sent me to the hospital. I was at the emergency room. I had high heart rate, high blood pressure, dizziness, vertigo. I was sent to neurologists, cardiologists, ear, nose, and throat doctors, MRIs, MRAs, EKG, EEG, ultrasound, everything. They looked at everything and they were like, you're anxious. Here you go. Here's some medication. And I went that route. But I met a chiropractor who, when I got adjusted, I didn't have the anxiety and it started to get better. And I got under regular care and my asthma, my allergies, my sinuses, everything got better. I was off medications. I was off anxiety drugs. And I was like, wow, the body is self-healing, self-regulating. And my whole paradigm started to shift where it was like an empowering thing. Like I have the ability to heal. And I went to chiropractic school seeking with the true philosophy of what chiropractic is, which is, there's an innate intelligence. It's utilized through the nervous system. It travels from the brain, the spinal cord to every cell, tissue, and organ, and it can be interfered with. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense to me. It made sense on a systemic level. So I got into chiropractic and I was practicing that. And the roots of my profession actually are very much intertwined with mysticism, if you will. D.D. Palmer, who invented the profession, he had some ties to the Golden Dawn. So there's some very similar themes in both of them. So when I found the mystery school, I was like, well, I understand a lot of this philosophy of what I'm looking for. But I wanted it more to support me in my practice, like of chiropractic initially. I didn't really want to do it, but I noticed how it kept me safe from other people's stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it makes sense though, because it's ultimately caring for more people and wanting to help people. I think that's what the
Yeah.
underlying drive of somebody who might not be a healer or guide or whatever today, but they are
Yeah.
still seeking a way to overcome suffering, whether it's physical pain, internal pain. It's a seeking to overcome suffering and a
Mm-hmm.
seeking to help others. I think those are the two underlying things that
Yeah.
anybody who does become a guide, even if we're resistant to it at first,
Yeah.
it's like if you've talked to any of these people, they still hold that no matter how kind of a lost or chaotic life might be.
Yep. Yeah. And I think people want to feel safer in their environment, in their life. They want to feel like safer, not like they're just getting pulled in every direction and bombarded with, because the world is more sensitive. Like individuals are much more sensitive now than they were 10 years ago. And I can say in practice, their health is more affected by lots of things like stress. I mean, stress comes at people in so many different ways, a variety. And I think we're just getting to the point where we're just a little bit, we're carrying too much around. And people don't know how to get rid of it through all the physical means because they've tried them. And I hear this all the time. It's like, I changed my nutrition. I've tried exercise. I've tried this doctor, that doctor, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, well, I have nowhere else to turn. What do I do? And it's like, well, the one aspect you never looked at was the internal state, your energy. You never looked at it. You never changed it. You never tried it.
Well,
I
because
recently life
that's logical for
activated.
them.
It is. And recently I life activated this girl and she was having a lot of this. She was a chiropractic client for a couple months. She was having these MS symptoms and she worked in a school district that was in a city school and she was really stressed. And I life activated her and she came in the next week and she goes, that thing did something. I quit my job Friday. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, it was making me sick. It was the reason I was sick. And I could see it so clearly now. And I was like, whoa. And she was like, I know I can be better. I know I can heal better. And I know this is stopping me. If I don't have a job for a little bit, that's fine, because I know that that is a major reason that I'm experiencing this. And I was like, okay. I didn't know that was going to happen for her.
No, yeah, you should have told her, yeah, I'm going to see it in the future. I see you're going to quit your job just within
Well,
3 days.
I did that. I did that before we did any protocol. No, I'm kidding.
All right. You have like a whatever, like the psychics wear like a glittery head wrap or something with crystal ball.
Is that what they get? Is that what they get?
I've never been to it.
I'm gonna gift you one for having me on this podcast. I'll send you one.
Crystal ball first. I got crystals, but I don't have a crystal ball. But yeah, it's like, well, she felt better, she did better, and that was just part of her path. And it's what are we? Her own well being and progression was more important than sitting something that just she determined wasn't serving her. Maybe like not everybody has to leave their job, right? Maybe it makes your job. Maybe it makes your job better and more enjoyable, or maybe it attracts better opportunity, or maybe you get promoted, or maybe you get something, right?
Yeah.
That's what happens a lot of times too. It just uplifts everything. For some reason, it's funny. A lot of people who do healing sessions with me make a good chunk of money right afterwards. Some within minutes, some within 24 hours, some within a week. And I had one guy, he did a life activation. He made $15,000 the very next day. And he was like telling everybody in the office, he's like, hey, I just did this thing. I made all this money. They started laughing at him. I was like, it's not, when you do the healing, it clears out the crap. It's kind of like blocking the good from coming in. So it's like, if that's sort of where the direction you're going towards, it makes that stuff to come in easier. But maybe somebody has a minimum wage job. Are they going to have the same result? I don't know. Maybe they want to scratch. I have no idea. But it just makes things easier to come in.
And sometimes maybe people make their life less about money and more about like how they can be fulfilled across the board. Abundance isn't just so linear. Like it's not just money, but it's like my family grew, my career grew, my friendships grew, and maybe repairing family relationships. Like healing can show up in so many different little aspects that over time are just huge wins.
Yeah, I think ultimately for me, I say this a lot. It's like the spiritual path it deepens your relationships, like one with yourself, with the divine, and with others. And through the connection to others, you progress and advance and become more creative and, innovative, get stuff done. And then you're able to serve more people. So like those are the most fulfilling parts of life. And going back to like the energy, it's like, that's really why we're doing all this stuff. It's not for it's not for the stuff, right? It's for the thing behind the stuff. Then we just get to, this is a bad example, but if I have my car or something, we get to play with the stuff, right? That's the fun part. But it's ultimately to know ourselves and lead people that way and know God, and then that becomes our limitless potential. I got a guy I'm doing a podcast with in a couple hours, though. That's his whole motto, and he's not on the spiritual path, but I like how he says it, right? He's like, we're all children of God. And he's like, what is God? God is limitless. What is our potential? Our potential is limitless. So even if we don't, even if we're not on a spiritual path, you can still see how that makes sense and how that's, a very grand vision to have.
And it's showing up so much more in even the business world. There's a book called Shine, and it's through. Are you familiar with Traction, the series Traction? Like Gino Wickman wrote it. It's good. They're good business books, but the book Shine just came out recently, and there's like 10 principles to like kind of operate by, and I think number 4 is know thyself. Written that way within the book is like this is an important aspect of you having like a fulfilling career beyond just the money and the business. It's like you need to know thyself and you're going to run a much better company. So it's like the reason to do that is for whatever you're trying to accomplish in this world. It's going to help you. It's going to help you be a better whatever it is that you are doing in this life. By knowing thyself, it's just going to be to your advantage to do it in the best way possible.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think what I say about the spiritual path too, it's like life will give you the what, but not the how. So spiritual path gives you the how, it gives you the principles, it gives you that scientific repeatable process to actually achieve that thing. It's not going to just leave you kind of empty handed and guessing. It's like, okay, know thyself. What does that actually mean, and how can we actually get there? Right? All right, cool. Yeah, we covered a ton of cool stuff. I guess what is it? It's balance and alignment. So Do you
bouncing
have
alignment.
what's the best way if anybody wants to connect with you? You're in Pennsylvania. You have chiropractic
Yeah,
practice
yeah,
and healing and
yeah. The center at, so I mean, on Instagram I'm at Dr. Bill Moss. The center at Keystone in Pennsylvania, technically Reading, Pennsylvania, Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, which is where Taylor Swift is originally from. Just so
oh
you
really?
know. Yeah, and then my chiropractic practice is Keystone Specific Chiropractic Center. So look forward to connect. And we said at the beginning, the Evolving Practice podcast. We'll have to have you on down the line, me and Sean. So we'll have
Sweet.
to set that up,
Talk
Mr.
about all
Michael.
my
So thanks for
my
having
back.
me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
Awesome, appreciate it.